Bucham Abayim to the 9th and continuing series of lectures on the 13 principles of faith and Maimonides. That is the Yud Gimel Ikkarim of the Rambam, which the Rambam sets forth in his Hakdama to Perichelek as part of his Perish Mishnayos. Last time we began the 7th Ikkar, which is out of Moshe Rabbeinu. And I think it's worth it to read inside in the text too. This is the Soda Shvi. I'm reading from the text of Rabbi Shilat, translated directly from the Arabic. Nevuas Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the 7th Ikkar. V'hu la'amin shu'aviyin shalachol ha'naviyim. He's the father of all Nevi'im. Shalafon of Shlacha. Those Nevi'im who came before him and after him. Kulam hen tachta b'madrega. All Nevi'im are lower than Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of their level of prophecy. For Bechir Hashem, he's the choice of God, the choices of God, of Kodesh Baruch Hu, Mikol Amin Anoishi, from the entire human race. Moshe Rabbeinu apprehended more, not only than anyone before him apprehended, but the Rambam's position is Moshe Rabbeinu apprehended more than any person will ever apprehend, right, in the future. Moshe Rabbeinu actually was able to transcend the human order until he reached the order of angels. He actually existed at the level of angels. He was not left a partition that he did not penetrate. There was nothing in his physical body which prevented him from doing so. By the way, this is a proof that Moshe Rabbeinu had a physical body. He had a body. He reached a high madrega, high level, but he had a physical body. Not like those people want to interpret that according to certain people, he didn't have a physical body. It's not important. I mean, we don't have to explore the opinion of idiots. Yeah.
No, I didn't
have okay, in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu, according to the Rambam, achieved the highest level, which is called intellect. In other words, according to the Rambam, what is unique about Moshe Rabbeinu, very unique about Moshe Rabbeinu, is the fact that he reached the highest level of intellect. And therefore, not only his physical body, but I would say his koichas demyonis, which means his imaginary faculties, did not get in the way of his prophecy. In other words, all the prophets, according to the Rambam, use both the rational faculty and what's called the imaginary faculty, right? And I would imagine the imaginary faculty is more connected with bodily functions than the rational faculty. According to the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu's imaginative faculty did not get in the way of his rational apprehension. Okay. And therefore, he was able to speak to Kodesh Baruch Hu without the intermediary of angels. Now, in other words, so according to the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu is the pinnacle of intellect, and this unique intellectual apprehension of Moshe Rabbeinu sets him apart from not anyone who came before him and after him too. Okay, now. So, Rambam says, I really want to explain this incredible. I really want to explain this topic, right, in detail. To unlock the secrets of the verses, to explain what the Torah says. Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was pel peh. The entire verse. These are very subtle matters. And this will require a tremendous amount of expansion and introductions and metaphors. You have to explain actually the entire declension of intellects from a Kodesh Baruch Hu, which are the Malachim, the intellects, the angels. And he says, of course, something like this, well, right? And he says, he says, even 100 pages That wouldn't be enough. He said, I'm going to leave it for its place. Because maybe I'm going to write a commentary on the Agadatas. Droshes here means Agadatas, right? Or maybe a book on prophets which I've begun. Or Perush Eli Yesodis. So I want to speak about these foundations. Okay, now.
Did he write those books?
Good question. The question is, did he write these books? Now, my opinion is that he did. Okay? Look, it could possibly that he didn't write the books, but my opinion is that he did. I'm going to explain to you where I think he wrote the book. And this will help us understand really where the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu really fits into the Rambam. Okay, now, first of all, it's interesting that when he speaks about the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, he said to really explain it, we have to explain all these yesodis. In other words, we have to explain, the physical, metaphysical ontology, beginning with God and the angels. We have to explain the different psukim, the different verses. We have to explain prophecy. We have to explain we basically have to explain everything. Now, what's interesting is that the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, which is in the section of prophecy, says something very, very interesting. We know that there's I actually referred to this before. We know that in the Moreh Nevuchim there's several chapters in which the Rambam deals with prophecy. And the chapters begin with Perek Lamed Beis, second chapter of the second section, right? In the Schwartz edition, which we've been using, it begins on page 373. And this section of prophecy goes basically goes to Perek Memhei, chapter 45. Although actually, the Rambam does speak about Nevuah in several chapters after that too. Now, so there's a section of Nevuah. So one could imagine that if the Rambam says over here, the Sefer Nevuah Shachilosi, but he's explained it in the book of prophecy, which I've begun, so one would imagine that in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam would explain the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu in the section of Nevuah, because here the Rambam has quite a number of chapters, 14, 15 chapters, which deal with prophecy. But what's interesting is, the Rambam says something very interesting in Perek Lamed Hey, chapter 35, of section 2, and this is on page 382 of the Schwartz edition, and he says like this, he says, Kavayiv halti lanoshim kulam, I've already explained to everybody, as Abbas have that the four differences between the Nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu and the Nevuah of other Nevi'im. I've already explained that, right? Now where have you explained? This is the Rambam. I've explained them in the Perush Mishnah, which is our Perush Mishnah. I haven't read the four differences, but the Rambam goes on and lists four differences between the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu and the prophecy of other prophets. Over Mishnah Torah. Also, the Rashi Mishnah Torah, the Rambam actually, in Halacha Vav Perek Zayin, there also too, the Rambam devotes a discussion to differences between the Nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu and that of other prophets. Okay? Says the Rambam, Ein tzorech lachzor al zois ve'ein zois mimatoras hasefer. Says the Rambam, I don't have to repeat this, and this is not the purpose of the Sefer. I think that's the purpose of the Sefer. What is Judaism without Moshe Rabbeinu? Masha dichal isha kol davar she'omer al deis nevuah perek zevach al deis tzuas nevuah some shekol neviim asher lefnei Moshe Rabbeinu el b'yom ha'acharav. In other words, everything that's speaking about prophecy in these chapters is going to be on the prophecy of those neviim, those prophets, who either before Moshe Rabbeinu or after Moshe Rabbeinu. Ve'ilu nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu. What about the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu? I mean, isn't that central to Judaism? It's one of your Ikkarim. Not only is it one of your Ikkarim, you probably write more words in the seventh Ikkar than you wrote in all the Ikkarim put together, right? Says the Rambam, Lo etchachas b'pogam ela ba'af bin. I'm not going to mention even one word. Lo b'mefurash lo b'remes. I'm not going to say one word, not even explicitly or not even alludingly. Is that a word?
No.
Allusion. I'm not going to use an illusion. I'm not going to allude to it. So we'll make up a word. Okay. Very interesting. Not one word I'm going to mention about Moshe Rabbeinu. So where is Moshe Rabbeinu? Where is he in the Moreh Nevuchim? In negative theology, we spoke about the incorporeality of Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we mentioned that the Rambam explained the psukim in Parshas Kisisa, what Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to say, what he wasn't allowed to say. But the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, why should the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu not be in the Moreh Nevuchim? Hasn't the Rambam told us explicitly to explain the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu? What do I have to know? I have to know a tremendous expansion and introductions, right? And general ideas and Mishalim, the Metzias of the Malachim, the order of the angels, the hierarchy of angels, and their hierarchy from the existence, the nature of angels, of intellects, the hierarchy from Kodesh Baruch Hu, the nefesh and all the koichos, the nature of the human being, right? I mean, what is there more to speak about? However, this is a big question. Where is Moshe Rabbeinu in the Moreh Nevuchim? Now, the fact is, the Rambam says I'm not going to speak one word about Moshe Rabbeinu in these chapters of Nevuah, and it's not true. It's not true. Why is it not true? Because, for example, the Rambam devotes Perek Lamed Tes to a discussion between Moshe Rabbeinu and the other prophets, the other Nevi'im. The Rambam is making the claim that Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to reveal the law. Reveal the Torah as law, as halacha. Other Nevi'im are not coming to reveal law. They're coming to the mashgichim. They're coming to, in fact, encourage us, or warn us, or in fact on the Nevuah, but to listen to the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Whereas the other Nevi'im are coming, says the Rambam, right, just to tell us to strengthen our belief and our commitment to the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. What is Moshe Rabbeinu coming? Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to present to us the most balanced person, reasonable, balanced person. The Rambam brings Chukum, Mishpat, and Tzadikim. Says Rambam, what is Tzadikim? Balanced. Muzanim, says the Rambam. And now in Perek Lamed Tes, at the very end of page 395 in the Swatch edition, that a person should not go to the two extremes of Naziris, right, of self-flagellation, and also a person shouldn't go to the other extreme of self-indulgence, right? But rather a person should seek somehow what's the most reasonable, what the Rambam says to be the middle path. Okay? And this is really what Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to reveal to us. Now, so the Rambam does discuss Moshe Rabbeinu in Perek Lamed Tes, and not only an allusion in one word, but actually discusses, in that sense, what the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to do. But in addition to that, the Rambam does speak about the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of Perek Memhei, chapter 45, page 416 in the Schwartz edition. And he speaks about Pe'al Pe' Adaber Boy, right? That the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu was a Nevuah that uses only the rational intellect, the Koach HaMedaber, or not the Koach HaMedames, as Professor Schwartz translates it. And there's an entire paragraph there about Moshe Rabbeinu. So, for sure, the Rambam does mention a word or two about Moshe Rabbeinu. And in fact, actually, in other words, we get an idea of what the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu is in contradiction to that of other Nevi'im. However, what I'd like to do is, I'd like to go to the introduction of the Rambam to the Moreh Nevuchim. Okay? Now, first of all, right, the Rambam right, is coming. What is the purpose of the guide of the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam? So, the Rambam tells us, right, that the Rambam speaks about the Moreh Nevuchim is coming to tell us the let me 1 second over here. First of all, the Rambam speaks about that the Sefer is coming to explain us psukim, scripture of the Nevi'im, understand the prophets. Okay? But then the Rambam goes on and says, right, that the Sefer is going to teach us what we would translate the true signs of the law. Okay, that's what the Rambam says, right? And the Rambam says, "In the Omer Sefer B'Saleh Kol Koshel Mevin Oisai." It's not going to take away every difficulty, right? But nonetheless, I'm on page 11. But he says, right? He goes on his basically about Ma'aseh Bereishis, Ma'aseh Merkava. The Ma'aseh Bereishis is Chochmas HaTeva, says the Rambam, which is the natural wisdom, natural philosophy. And Ma'aseh Merkava is metaphysics, Chok Malokis. So the Rambam says he's going to say things only if he's not going to hide these things. He's only say them b'rosh prakim. He's going to allude to them in chapter headings. Says the Rambam. It goes on. What is the purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim? Okay. He speaks of he speaks about. Now he says like this. He goes on. It's like this. He speaks about Ma'aseh Bereishis, Ma'aseh Merkava. Ma'aseh Bereishis, Chazal say that you can't teach it to a lot of people, right? Okay. Okay, don't think that these secrets, right? You do them at tachlisim v'seifim le'echad mitana. Don't think that everyone knows all these secrets from the beginning to the end. Sometimes these secrets somehow illuminate us. So somehow we think that they're the light of the day. But then there's a illumination. It's like a lightning. And then the darkness of the physical world sets in again. Right? It's like a person's in the middle of the night, says the Rambam. And the lightning flashes. Once, twice, a few times a night. On page 13. Sometimes the lightning flashes so often, so a person feels he's in a non-ceasing, right, illumination. That the night turns into the daytime. Who's this person that the lightning flashes so often that he feels he's in the daytime? This is the highest level of the Nevi'im, on which it said about him, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Etc., etc. In other words, the Rambam is speaking about the secrets of the Torah, part of which he's going to reveal a little bit in the Moreh Nevuchim. And who is the person, right, for whom the lightning flashes to the point where the night lights up? That's none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. Interesting. So, it would come out that the purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim, according to the Rambam, is coming to reveal, albeit in a hidden way, certainly a knowledge, an understanding of the world, which is characterized by the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's clear from the introduction of the Rambam. Now, what's interesting is that this theme pops up several times within the Moreh Nevuchim. Now, for example, I mentioned before that at the end, in Perek Lamed Tes, in chapter 39 of the second section, the Rambam says that the purpose of the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu is to present us, to reveal to us, right, what the Rambam says, HaMezek HaMe'uzan Shusia Izun Sheb'oisei Min. The most perfect balance of the human species, of the human race. That's what the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu has come to tell us. Right? Anything which deviates from this perfect mean, right? Says the Rambam, is either insufficient or exaggerated. So this Torah, Shehiva Shehi Muzenis Va'omar. And this Torah, it says, Chukim U'ishpatim Tzadikim. And so the Rambam, Yedeata, you know, Tzadikim Perusha Muzanim. Tzadikim is Muzanim, balanced. Kihem Avodi She'en Bem Torah Vagzama. The Torah entails on us a worship of God, which is not exaggerated. It doesn't weigh down on a person. Kamo Hanazirus. Like those who separate themselves. Right? When the Didas is like fun and people who torture themselves, submit themselves to self-flagellation. Or for the people who actually go overboard in their lust for the world. Now, it says the Rambam, when we speak about in this book on the Tamei Mitzvahs, which is already in the third section, it will be explained to you this balance, this wisdom, that which is fitting to explain concerning these topics. And therefore it says, in other words, the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to reveal to us the most balanced way in which a person should conduct himself. And the Rambam is identifying the most balanced ethic with the wisest. In other words, that ethic which is closer, which is on the highest level, achieve the highest level of wisdom, of Chachma. Now, what's interesting is the Rambam, as he tells us in chapter 39, right, actually comes back to this theme in the Tamei Mitzvahs. So, for example, in chapter 25 of section 3 of the Tamei Mitzvahs, the Rambam explains the fact that when anything a Kadosh Baruch Hu does, right, the Rambam here on page 5 to 10, chapter 25, section 3, Perek Chafei Chelek Gimel, right, and the Rambam, right, right, in other words, a Kadosh Baruch Hu does in accordance with his wisdom. Right? But Kadosh Baruch Hu only does something which is possible, and that which is possible is defined by his wisdom. Right? There's no divide, nothing preventing Kadosh Baruch Hu to create something, do something which represents the ultimate good. Zui das ben Torah, this is the opinion of every ben Torah, and also the opinion of the philosophers. This is our opinion too. Even though we believe the world is created ex nihilo, But creative still doesn't mean that Kodesh Baruch just did something by pure will. But they believe that it was God's great wisdom, which we cannot apprehend. In other words, basically, the world was created in accordance with God's wisdom. And of course, this wisdom existed before the world was ever brought to creation. In other words, we can't say that the world was created just from a quirk of God, but it's dictated according to God's wisdom. And the Rambam brings verses on this. Okay?
Obviously, the word before there doesn't really apply.
Okay. There's an interesting contradiction here. Is the world eternal? Is not eternal? We spoke about that already, but we'll speak a little bit again. Okay? Speaking towards the end, towards the last paragraph on page 511. This is the opinion of our Lord, the opinion of the Torah, and this is what every person has to believe in. There's nothing absurd by saying that all of creation, right, is commensurable with His great wisdom. Here's with the capital H. Even though we don't know much, we don't operate all of this wisdom, but for sure, the world and everything in the world, right, is the cause of this wisdom. Al das zois nivnasa Torahs Moshe Rabbeinu kula. The Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the entire Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, is built on this premise that every act, which includes every command of God, has a basis in the reason of in reason. And that's what it says. And the Rambam says, you should pay attention, you should understand this. In other words, the entirety of the Torah, which is the entire Torah of Torah's Moshe, the foundation of Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu, it is based upon the intellect of God. And the intellect of God appears to be manifested in two aspects. One is ethics, and ethics on the highest level would be what we call balanced. This is the Rambam explains in chapter 39 of section 2. And of course, ontology, the logic and wisdom with which Kodesh Baruch created the world. The reflection of this, as we've discussed in the earlier principles, is the way in which man comes to understand Kodesh Baruch. Now, what's interesting is that the Rambam goes on and speaks about this again in chapter 27 of section 3, which is page 516, 517. The Rambam says, Kavanas Kalatera Shnei Devarim. The purpose of the Torah is two things. V'heim Tekinas Hanefesh Kinas Haguf. The Torah is coming to rectify both man's soul, his spiritual aspect, and his physical aspect. Tekinas Haguf. Okay? And the Rambam speaks about ethics, etc., etc. And then Rambam speaks about shleimus, the person's shleimus and his beliefs, right? His intellect, and goes to the Rambam and says, this is on page 517, the third paragraph of the Short edition again, L'cheira Torah mises, the true Torah, asher bi'anu shi achas being built, which you explain that it is unique. He v'hi Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu, that is the Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu. Ba rak lamed osanu is coming to teach us shnei hashlemius gam yachad, to teach these two perfections together. Koloima, let us say, tekinas matzav b'nei adam elu im elu, basically the ethics of society. Okay? And then he says, and through these good midas, right? Right? That every person can reach the first shleim is the first perfection, which is amunus amatan deis nechonis, proper philosophy, proper beliefs. Vishabehem tusak hashleimus achroina. In other words, the Torah is coming to teach us both ethics and both ontology, beliefs and morals. And this is the unique property of the Torah, of Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu, because it's based upon the intellect of God, which was the basis for God's creation of the world. So in other words, we see clearly that the intellectual perfection of Moshe Rabbeinu, and I was about that to ethical perfection too, right, was vital for what? Was vital for the that Moshe Rabbeinu is the person who reveals the Torah, who reveals the Torah, who reveals Kodesh Baruch Hu's Torah. No one else can do that. No other Navi can do that, because every other Navi has an admixture of what's called the imaginative intellect, which is chaitzit, which comes to divide between the intellect of HaKadosh Baruch, the intellect which man can apprehend of God, right, and between a person's more physical needs, which come to distort that. So in other words, we see over here, but very interesting is now goes on the Rambam and explains that all the mitzvahs have, the Rambam's famous shita. You can listen to our lectures on shkafashakal.com. The Rambam's famous opinion is that all the mitzvahs have a reason behind them. And this is a property of acts of God, which God acts only in accordance with His reason. The Rambam actually bases his Tamya mitzvahs on this principle that God acts with reason. God doesn't create with a quirk, kiviyachol, but He creates on the basis of His reasoning. So now, what we have is very interesting. What is the Moreh Nevuchim? The Moreh Nevuchim is none other but the Rambam's understanding of the Nevuos Moshe Rabbeinu. The Nevuos Moshe is coming to explain to us the basis of both Jewish ethics and Jewish belief. The basis of Maaseh Bereishis, Maaseh Makava. The basis of the creation of the world and the basis of the structure of metaphysics. That is the Moreh Nevuchim, according to the Rambam. The Moreh Nevuchim is the Rambam's rendition of what he understood to be, in his terms, the message or the import of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. So, if we look at all the things the Rambam speaks about here, he speaks about Hakdamas u'mishalim, introductions, which means, Rambam calls Hakdamas means, axioms, mishalim, the metaphors Rambam speaks about in the first section of Moreh Nevuchim. He speaks about mishalim with the Nevi'im, the Metzias HaMalachim, the Madrekas of the angels, the intellects, right? Right? Nevuah, the Yesodus, all these things are in the Moreh Nevuchim, but all these things are part and parcel of Nevuah's Moshe Rabbeinu. But because they constitute the wisdom and ethic which is being communicated by the Torah, based upon the axiom that at the basis of this ethic and this knowledge is the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's only the intellect of Moshe Rabbeinu which is able to apprehend this and to reveal this to the world. Yeah.
So when he says in 35, I won't speak about these chapters.
He doesn't have to do, because it's all Moshe Rabbeinu. Everything's Moshe Rabbeinu. Everything's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what he says, not even one word. Because he doesn't have to. On the contrary, the chapters and prophecy are coming to distinguish between that and the rest of the Sefer. Right. That's the Rambam saying. Now, what's interesting is, and I think this is important, is that this is in fact actually the the basis. Not only is this in fact actually the basis of or the basis of the entire Torah, but this actually was the Rambam's understanding of the Moshe Rabbeinu. The Moshe Rabbeinu encompassed not only the intellect and the wisdom which lies at the basis of the laws of the Torah, right? But also, in fact, lies at the basis of our understanding of the entire ontology of the world and its ethical content. So Rambam speaks about that in his sections of negative theology, which is actually expressed in Parshas Kisisa, Mitzvah Shem, this week. We spoke about this already. Now, just to say that the Rambam actually makes this much clearer at the end of the Moreh Nevuchim too. And the Rambam concludes the Moreh Nevuchim with chapter 54 in section 3, Perek Nun Dalet Chelek Gimel, which begins on page 670 in the Schwartz edition. And then the Rambam speaks about Chachma, wisdom, the concept of wisdom. And of course the Rambam mentions, right, that knowledge of the Torah and wisdom, right? He speaks about these two concepts, and he says, they said on Moshe Rabbeinu, he's al b'chachma, al b'torah, al b'neviim. Okay? So he speaks on Moshe Rabbeinu. And then, the Rambam speaks about levels of perfection, different levels of perfection. And of course, the fourth level of perfection, says the Rambam, is intellectual perfection. This is on page 673. Right? In other words, the third level of perfection is perfection in most of the mitzvahs. The second level of perfection is bodily perfection. Right? The first level of perfection is financial perfection. If that means anything. The fourth level is intellectual perfection. Okay? And of course, the Rambam has already told me that Moshe Rabbeinu is, we see this here in the Ikkarim, represents the highest level of intellectual perfection. And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu, said Moshe Rabbeinu is called Abba Chachma, Abba Torah, Abba Neviah. What's interesting is, after the Rambam lists all these four levels of perfection, he speaks about another level of perfection. He doesn't call it level of perfection, another type of perfection. And that's imitating God, imitating a Kodesh Baruch Hu. He speaks about the pasuk, Odianas Drachecha, pasuk we spoke about, which Moshe Rabbeinu learns to imitate a Kodesh Baruch Hu. He speaks about Chesed Mishpat, Tzedakah Ba'aretz, the Shloshas Midas. Okay, this is the Shleimus HaAdam. This is the highest perfection of man. This is the highest perfection a person can glorify in. Whoever can, he says, Rambam says, the pasuk says, the pasuk says, Ki ani Hashem oiseh chesed mishpat tzedakah ba'aretz, right? Ki be'elech chafatzinu Hashem. He says, the purpose is supposed to talk about in this pasuk. He eifo shu hivir hashleimus ha'adam. This is coming to clarify. He eifo shu hivir hashleimus ha'adam, that the perfection of man sheba yispar ba'emes, that a person can really glorify. Actually, the pasuk he's speaking about actually is the pasuk before this. Klayamar Hashem al yishalo chol b'chochbasoi, al yishalo agibig v'osoi, al yishalo osh b'osoi, ki im b'zois yishalo haskel v'yoda oisi. The Rambam explains this is a person who's reached the level, all these levels of gone beyond chachma, ashrus, gevurah, which is the three levels of perfection. What's haskel oisi is this level of perfection a person imitates God ethically. He madrega. What is this madrega? Shall mi shegiah lahasik as hakel yis'ala kefi yacholto, is the madrega of the person who reached to apprehend the Kodesh Baruch Hu kefi yacholto. He was able to reach the highest level in which he understands the Hashgacha and the entire Bria. Who's that? It's Moshe Rabbeinu. It's Moshe Rabbeinu. The purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim is to bring us to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. The Rambam concludes the Moreh Nevuchim, Moshe Rabbeinu. He begins with Moshe Rabbeinu, speaking about the lightning, and he concludes the Moreh Nevuchim with the Moshe Rabbeinu. The Moreh Nevuchim is Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what it is. The Moreh Nevuchim is the vision, the apprehension of Moshe Rabbeinu.
But isn't it impossible for anyone to reach that level?
No one can ever reach that. But in other words, every person, in other words, right, no, chas v'shalom. I mean, we're not saying the Rambam would have to be a kaifer. The Rambam is claiming no one can reach it, but I'm saying tzaddik, but just tzaddik.
I mean, balanced, the ethical level.
Tzaddik, maybe ethical. He can't be the chacham of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah.
That's tzaddik, right? One tzaddik. You can't be Moshe Rabbeinu. You can't sit in yeshiva and learn 20 years and become Moshe Rabbeinu, not necessarily. You could, maybe, I don't think so. You can't be Moshe Rabbeinu. It's impossible. It's what the Ikkarim of the Rambam. No one can ever reach the Yibitah appearance from Moshe Rabbeinu.
So where does the Moreh Nevuchim get me to?
The Moreh Nevuchim gets you to the greatest level a person could possibly reach according to his yecholos, according to his possibility. But there's no question about it. The Moreh Nevuchim is coming to point me in the direction of the understanding of Moshe Rabbeinu, of the Torah, which is this level of intellect and ethics which constitutes the revelation of the Torah.
I mean, this understanding of the purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim is presumably not shared by most of the Jewish world who's not interested in learning the Moreh Nevuchim, or they just don't understand what the Moreh Nevuchim is for.
The important thing is it was shared by the Rambam. There's no question about it, right? It was about it.
Is it just that they agree with this but just don't agree with what he says, or they just don't agree this is we read this?
I haven't polled people. Most people have never learned the Moreh Nevuchim. Most people have a lot to say about the Moreh Nevuchim without having learned it, which is usually typical of people who don't like books. I find that most people don't like books, never read them. Who learn some books, never read them. But in any case, in my opinion, this is rather the Rambam's. I think this is the book the Rambam says he was going to write, and he wrote it. However, so why did the Rambam say, I'm going to write a book? Say I wrote the book. No. This is the secret message of the Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam hid it. He said, I'm going to write a book if I get the chance. He wrote the book. Why do I say he wrote the book? Maybe he didn't write the book. The answer is that we know that the Rambam was constantly correcting his Perush of Mishnayos. In fact, actually, in the Yesod HaRaviv, you know that the Rambam was constantly editing his Perush of Mishnayos. And I presume by then he had written most of the Moreh Nevuchim. Not the entire point. The secret message of the Moreh Nevuchim, I'm telling HashkafaCircle.com, you're the first ones to know this, is communicating to us Ke'ein, the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. But then, as the Rambam understood it from his understanding of the Torah. Like he says, no one can understand it completely. But the person who understood it completely was Moshe Rabbeinu. And for us, the few flashes are good enough. It could be the few flashes of the Moreh Nevuchim too. But when the Rambam says, I'm going to write a book about it, I'm planning on writing a book about it, he wrote it. But like every other of the deepest, message of the Moreh Nevuchim, I'm sure there's not very many people who actually picked it up in the Rambam. But that's what I'm saying. That's my claim. Okay, so we see how central is the voice of Moshe Rabbeinu, parts of Moshe Rabbeinu, in the Ikkarim. Now, I want to just go on, and I want to speak a little bit about this, if I could, because the voice of Moshe Rabbeinu is quite central. And what do we mean by intellect? Now, what's interesting is that the Rambam lists 4 differences between the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Nevuah of other prophets. Okay, let's go through them very, very quickly. The Rambam says that every Navi speaks to a Kadosh Baruch Hu through an intermediate, an Emtzai. And Moshe Rabbeinu speaks directly. directly, whatever that means.
This means he's not connected with the active intellect. He's connecting beyond the active intellect.
I don't know.
It must mean that, doesn't it? We said last week the active intellect was like a malach. It was an intermediary on some level.
Right, okay, fine. No, I'm not,
So what's the mechanism? So he's the entire mechanism of
I don't know. I'll tell you, I don't think we're possible of comprehending this, but I want to use a working understanding of it, like I before.
Well, this is quite important. It's not just.
I know.
It's not just qualitative.
I agree.
Quantitative. It's entirely qualitative.
I agree with you. I want to read through them and want to speak about it. Okay. So, for example, without an intermediate, like it says, "Pal adaba boy." I mean, you can't say Moshe Rabbeinu saw God because you can't see God. The Rambam already told us that. So, what does it mean? There has to be some of an intermediate. What is the intermediate? We'll speak about this. Okay. Now, second difference is the Navi sees it in a dream. Either a dream, a daydream. Moshe Rabbeinu is fully conscious. Okay? Im yenavim Hashem, Nivyachem Hashem b'ba elav ezvada, b'achal v'dav aboy, lo yichein abdi Moshe. So, okay. The third difference is, when a malach receives his prophecy, when a Navi receives his prophecy, he's shaking. He's under fear. He's under control of himself. Moshe Rabbeinu is cool, calm, and collected. Okay? And the fourth difference is that the Navi can only access the Nevuah at certain times, but the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants. Moshe Rabbeinu any time. Okay, now, once again, I can't picture these things. I don't think anyone can picture these things. I don't think anyone can comprehend these things. But what does it mean? What are these four differences? What do they mean? My opinion is, these four differences mean Moshe's Nevuah constitute an act of thinking, of analytic thinking. In other words, if there's an emtsai, which means there's a vision, which I have to interpret, I don't really understand the thing intellectually, or I'm dreaming, or daydreaming, I'm not fully conscious, or I'm shaking, I'm not in control of myself, or, I can't get it any time, that means I'm not really exercising my intellect, right, in a proper fashion. In other words, when a person understands something, he has to be totally in control of himself. Right? If you're learning a Blat Gemara and you're half asleep, or you're shaking and you're not in control of yourself, you're tzittering, or you have to ask your friend for a pshat, the emsoi, or like you praying for Siyata D'Shmaya and you can't get it now, you forgot it, and you're praying that it should come to you. That's not called learning. That's not called learning. You're not fully in control of it. Moshe Rabbeinu was a spitz lamdim. He was in control of himself. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah consisted of an act of intellectual understanding, fully conscious, full of control of himself, not under any overbearing fright or fear, and understanding the thing precisely and clearly in and of itself, with all its intellectual faculties. The Rambam is basically describing how a person understands something intellectually, not being swayed by emotion and by fright.
Was he tuned into some kind of
You're
message?
looking for a metaphysical thing. We're going to get to this. You see, I think we try to close our eyes and picture Nevuah. I don't picture it like that.
But
It's an act of learning.
But last time we had all these mashalim and overflowing spring and
That's for the other Nevi'im.
I understand.
That's for the other Nevi'im.
I understand. But I'm trying to say is the entire mechanism of Moshe Rabbeinu is totally different.
Totally different. In fact, the Rambam even says that you can't even speak about them as being in fact, it's not even Nevuah. The Rambam we only call both them Nevuah because they only have another word. But really, it's not Nevuah. You have the Nevi'im. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rambam says, in Parak Lamed Hey in Chelik Beis, that you can't even call them both Nevuah. But we call them by the same name, but the same name is meaningless. It has nothing to do with that. Now, what does this mean? That Moshe Rabbeinu is in total control. It's an incredible thing. Totally in control. He's learning. Like, learning the Gemara, but totally in control. So, it turns out that, like I said before, there's nothing to imagine. Because if we try to imagine anything, we're going to imagine it. So, I mean, no one can come to that level. But functionally, we have to understand that Moshe Rabbeinu is applying his intellect, just like anyone applies intellect, except that he was on an intellectual level that was higher than any other person. Way higher than any other person will be or will not be. Was or will ever be. But what the Rambam is describing here is the uses of a person's intellect where it's not being forced or being interfered with any imaginative or physical noise. Clear thinking. And that's why the Rambam has to posit Moshe Rabbeinu on a high level of seichel. Moshe Rabbeinu just said zitzabacher, as most people imagine him to be. Now the Rambam is going to say that too. The Rambam is going to say that Moshe Rabbeinu in the 8th principle is going to say he's called a mechoikek. He's madregas sefer, a scribe. Madregas sefer shekoyim loy that they read to him who kaisev kul, he writes it down. So people think Moshe Rabbeinu is a zitzabach, he's a stenographer, a secretary, so he can write it down. So what does it mean for this great intellect? This is a fundamental contradiction. Not only you give an Ikkarim, but a contradiction in the whole concept of Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, we're going to address that in Mitzvah Shem next time. Okay? Until then, from an undisclosed place, Yerushalayim HaKodesh, everybody should have a good week. HaKot Tavach.